that is politically active in a way that makes sense to you and join them. Push for voter registration, or for a climate tax, or a living wage. Working in a community teaches us that organizing is the founding principle of any kind of social change. We need to learn how to take a goal, break it into its component parts, give the right people ownership of each part, and fight until we see a resolution. People will tell you that it's too late, or that it will never work, or that things will never change. But it's never too late. Things can always get worse. A world that warms by 6 degrees rather than 2 will be catastrophically worse off. Change is slow until it is fast. The avalanche looks like nothing but a few pebbles moving until the whole hillside goes. Take care of yourself and remember to find joy. Don't judge your success by whether you save the world. None of us can. There are nearly 8 billion wonderful, amazing, occasionally crazy-making human beings on this planet. Each of us can only do what we can do. Do you know the story about the young woman who saw a beach covered with thousands of stranded starfish and began to throw them, one by one, back into the sea? They say that her friend laughed at her, saying, "What are you doing? Look at this beach. You can't save all these starfish. You can't even begin to make a difference." The young woman stopped for a moment, thought, and then leaned down to pick up another starfish. "I don't know about that," she replied, "but I know that I'm making a difference to this one." You don't need to transform the structure of the modern corporation single-handedly to make a difference. If you can make even a small part of a single firm a better place to work, you will change lives. I know it's hard. I know the temptation to despair. I read bad news for a living, and sometimes it can be hard to get out of bed. But most of the time, this work fills me with joy. I'm married to the love of my life, which helps enormously, but I've also had the opportunity to develop a way of thinking about my own role in the world that keeps me going when I'm tempted to simply lie down. My first husband was a man called John Huckra, who was born in New Jersey on the wrong side of the tracks. His father was a railroad conductor, and his mother was a homemaker. Through raw smarts and drivingly hard work, he became an astronomy professor at Harvard, spending as many as 200 nights a year observing on the world's great telescopes. He was good at what he did. There's a galaxy called Huckra's Lens in his honor. Together with 2 collaborators, he drew a map of the nearby universe that revealed a great wall of galaxies 600 million light-years long and 250 million light-years wide. It was one of the largest cosmic structures ever discovered, and it changed the face of astronomy. Astronomers had always assumed that if they looked out beyond the Milky Way, galaxies would be spread more or less evenly across the universe. But John's map suggested that the galaxies were instead confined to great sheets arcing around enormous voids millions of light-years across. The discovery made the front page of the New York Times and helped lay the foundation for the current dark matter-based view of the universe. John became one of the most highly cited astronomers of the 20th century. In 1991, when we had our first date, I was entirely ignorant of all this. He was just some guy that I'd been introduced to. Since we were both academics, I asked him how many papers he had published. He hesitated and guessed that it was something over 300. Since I had roughly 6 published papers at the time, I had to suppress a strong urge to leap to my feet and bolt, but we were married a year later, when he was 44. He loved the outdoors, particularly hiking and kayaking, and 3 years after we were married, our son Harry was born. John hadn't thought he would ever marry, let alone have a son, and he loved Harry with a passion. Some fathers feel ambivalence toward their children. As far as I can tell, John never did. Together we watched movies every Friday night. We bribed Harry with small Lego figures to climb the mountains of New Hampshire. Together we made chocolate cookies and cheesecake and laughed and sat around doing nothing at all. John became the president of the American Astronomical Association and in 2006 led the delegation to Prague that formally moved the motion to delist Pluto as a planet. Harry was in the room. In 2009, John was a member of a group that went to Rome to meet the Pope, the Catholic hierarchy being keen to demonstrate its support for astronomy ever since the tricky business with Galileo. John had been born Polish Catholic, and he was tickled pink to have the chance to address the Pope. In October 2010, we went to the 25th reunion of my Harvard Business School class. I can still remember how happy I was that night. I had just moved from MIT to the Harvard Business School and was enjoying it enormously. Our son had just entered high school and was thriving, and I was in love. This is it, I remember thinking. This is what we have both worked so hard for so many years. I thought we had mastered life. 5 days later, 3 weeks before my 50th birthday, I came home from a business trip to find John lying on the floor. I thought he was playing with the cats. When he wouldn't move, I called 911, screaming at the people who answered to send an ambulance now, right now, so that they could fix him, wake him, something. When I found him at the hospital, after a nightmare drive more surreal than any dream, he was quite dead. I held his hand. We buried him 3 days later. Harry was only 14. Losing John is one of the hardest things that has ever happened to me. Ordinary life felt like a betrayal. How could one do things like go to the grocery store when John was dead? The warm, tight circle of our family had been blown open. I felt as though I had gone from living in a beautiful house full of family and friends to camping out in a lean-to on an open plain in the midst of driving rain. Great waves of grief swept over me. I cried nearly every day for at least a year. I envied those who still had their partners, still had their families intact. But I learned that I had not paid nearly enough attention. A passionate, funny, kind man had shared his life with me, and I had spent far too much time worrying about whether he would take out the garbage. All that laughter and love was gone, and I hadn't treasured every single moment. I learned that people are far more loving and caring than I had given them credit for. People I hardly knew drove across town to give me lasagna at a time when I could barely speak. It felt as if the world had given way beneath me, and as if hundreds of hands had reached out to catch me. I learned that many worse things happen all the time. One woman I knew, the mother of one of Harry's school friends, stopped me in the parking lot a few weeks after his funeral and expressed her sympathy for my loss. Then she told me that she was leaving her husband because he'd been beating her for more than 15 years. A colleague told me he had lost his father when he was 6. Another mentioned losing a child. I learned that it is not death that is the tragedy. It is failing to live that is the tragedy. Everybody dies, but not everybody lives. John threw himself into life. He once flew to California to try to persuade a high school class to take more science courses. He once flew to Mexico the week before Christmas to help a graduate student finish her thesis. In a world in which many people hoard, John gave away his data and his time to everyone who asked. He loved our son with a fierce passion that stays with Harry today. Harry has often said that he had a father in a way that many of his friends did not. He did world-class science, but never made a fuss about who he was or what he'd done. He immersed himself in the beauty of the world. He would go anywhere and do anything, particularly when it meant hauling 50 pounds of gear uphill in the rain. As far as I could tell, he never cared about money or status. He wanted to do great science, support his students and anyone who needed his help, and to love the natural world and his family. He gave and gave of himself. The day before his funeral, I saw him. I still don't know if it was a dream or a waking vision, walking down a road toward distant mountains. He looked over his shoulder toward me and laughed. "Look for me in the trees and the rain," he said, and set off toward the horizon. When people ask me what keeps me going, I tell them I'm a Buddhist, and that Buddhism comes with both good news and bad news. The good news is that we're not going to die. The bad news is that this is because we don't exist. I believe, and you should feel free to interpret this as a metaphysical belief, although I believe that it is also a physical fact, that we are not real in the way we think we are. We are bundles of very small particles, temporarily patterned into structures of swirling energy. We think we are separate. We think we exist. But we are songs the universe is singing, glorious songs, but songs that will end. All we can do is try to sing as best we can. The roots of our current predicament are fear and separateness. We fear we will never have enough. We feel that we are separate and alone. But we are not. I can't tell you that trying to solve the great problems of our time will make you either rich or famous, although it might. I can tell you that you will have wonderful companions for the journey, that you will feel both more hope and more despair than you expect, and that in the end, you will die knowing that you have lived life to the full.